Angel. Nothing in Angel's college sociology classes had taught her how to persuade a schizophrenic man to give someone else a turn in the shower. The sibilant sounds of the running water quieted his demons and gave him his only peace. Getting him out would require a magic touch. Within Jerry's matted head churned awful worlds. The other shelter residents called him a priest of devils, conjuring evil with his constant muttering that nobody understood. His inner voices had taken over all circuits. To the residents, Jerry was a living symbol of the worst that could happen. Angel Kelly didn't fear him. Her professors lectured about case studies and textbook examples of schizophrenia, but she recognized Jerry's kind from fairy tales. She knew all about heartbreak and lost travelers alone in haunted woods. Jerry's was a very old story. To tell the truth, she felt a kinship with him. She was so sad these days and so mixed up that maybe they understood each other. Jerry certainly knew the kind of loss that would take a fairy tale to explain. He and Angel were both the lost children in the woods, as well as the monsters that chased them. Monsters did not fear other monsters. This wasn't to say Jerry did not have fears. There weren't any free clinics in Del Rio Beach for people like him, and anyway, it was nearly impossible to get him to go inside. He hated buildings. He took his meals in the courtyard and slept there too. Angel rigged a tarp for him when it rained and called it shelter. One hot Tuesday morning in mid-October, the story on the street was that Jerry got over his phobia of the indoors long enough to go into the Ace Hardware, grab a machete from the gardening tools, and hack a fellow's head off. The tellers of the tales streaming in for the dinner hour granted that the story was probably at least partially fiction. No one had seen it happen. There was no bloody head rolling in the gardening tools aisle for proof. Yet, when Jerry hunkered down in the outdoor shower stall, only Angel dared approach. The other residents spat on the patio cobblestones. They scratched their misery with curses, too spooked to say his name. Angel's boots slipped on the redwood deck. She'd helped build the structure, and it didn't drain well. She entered the world of white steam in which Jerry stood naked, and the color of dirt. Water dripped from the point of his beard. He was an earthen castaway. He was the spirit of a tree. "Did you use soap?" Angel asked. "Yeah, I used soap. You're not my mother." "Okay," she said, backing out. "Hurry up." The afternoon sun dried the wet beads on her eyelashes. The sun crushed the courtyard with an unrelenting heat that was putting everybody in a bad mood. "He's on his way," she said to the other guys. "You're too soft on the freak." This from Jean, who smelled of gasoline and used his enormous stomach as a battering ram. His size worked to his advantage with everybody but Angel. She intimidated Jean like a mouse did a cartoon elephant. He said she was too small and she made him nervous. He never knew where she would turn up. Angel also had the management authority to dump troublemakers into the street. A man Jean's size had a hard time hiding from the night patrols looking for sleepers on the beach and along the river. She'd expelled him for being belligerent, and she'd do it again. She had to think of the safety of the group. Jean was lucky Angel believed that everyone deserved a fresh start. Redemption was always possible, even for Big Jean. "Give him a minute, brother," she said. "John is ahead of you anyway." John gripped the ends of the towel around his neck, a trim, sandy mustache as tight as a toothbrush twisted over his ravaged lips. He was 22 days clean, a record among the men. He tossed Jean a half nod. Jerry slammed the door open and loped past him, his long whiskers jumping around as he muttered incantations. His clothes hung to his wet skin. He padded across the hot stones on bare feet as gnarled as roots. The other men stood off some yards just in case he was in a hacking mood. Jean used the distraction to jump the line. He moved fast, leading with his belly like a toddler proud of his body. After he disappeared behind the door, he slid the bolt with a neat click. John hurled himself against it. He cursed, he beat his fist. He was going to drag Gene out and kill him, the fat son of a bitch. Russell jumped down the kitchen stairs. Flour and sugar streaked his jeans and puffed from his boots. He leaned in for a kiss, but Angel ducked. Not in front of the residents. Not in front of anyone. That was the deal, and she wished he'd stop forgetting it. I need help with the guys, she said. Since when? Russell looked over her head at the ruckus. He smelled like vanilla cake. It's a weird day, she said. I'll look after this, Russell said. You go inside. You're needed. Why? She whipped around, scanning the courtyard for Jerry. Just go, he said. Gene started up with a Leonard Skinner tune and a solid baritone, singing about how he was a simple kind of man. Now the guys who hadn't even been waiting in line rushed the shower stall. They pounded on the thin walls. Russell hollered at them to back off. Luckily, Russell was bigger than most. He would handle it okay. God damn, Gene. Angel steeled herself for a new crisis, but within the kitchen, all was at peace. The new college volunteers chatted while a box fan whirled in the window. They were two young hippie-style girls with long, shiny hair and flowing skirts. Joni Mitchell crooned out of the tape player, and Jerry stood in the corner by the dry goods pantry, pointing one snaggle-nailed finger at the plank floor. What are you doing inside, man? She asked. He raised his head. The clouds from his eyes fell away, and just like that, there was no more underworld king. He was just a man. Jerry, she whispered. Her heart lifted. She'd heard of this, moments of clarity in a schizophrenic mind. She'd never expected to have one with Jerry. I'm so happy to see you, she said. Go outside, he growled in the back of his throat. No time for niceties. Sweet angel, get out of here now. Go outside now. Why? She asked. His face twisted with the effort of a person trying to speak a foreign language. Danger, he said. Danger, Will Robinson. He waved frustrated hands, then bowed out the door. She moved to follow, but one of the volunteers called her back. There's a man in the lobby asking to see the permits, she said. I told Russell, and he said to tell you. God damn, Angel said. Jerry returned to his regular spot under the elm tree in the corner of the courtyard by the fence. He was agitated, darkness having descended once more. Angel felt as helpless as if someone she loved had disappeared into a fog. Hey, is that guy Russell seeing anybody? The other volunteer asked, tomato sauce dripping off her flowing sleeve. Polished pink candy toenails peeped from brand new Birkenstocks. Angel did not have time for Jerry now. No sandals in an industrial kitchen, Angel said. Next time, wear shoes. They got these volunteers once in a while from the university. They cost training and time, yet rarely lasted more than one night. Angel tugged at a knot in her own tangled caramel-colored hair. She did not need to compare herself to a couple of college kids pretending at peace and love. Her boot heels echoed on the stairs down the basement office. The light flickered. One manager on duty was not enough. Without Russell around, she'd be in real trouble tonight. He was only supposed to be there to lead the Narcotics Anonymous meeting, not keep the peace. Keeping the peace was her job. One of her jobs. The city council sent an inspector almost every day. Behind her back, the mayor called her Queen of the Trolls. This tidbit came from a former classmate who worked in his office. The bigwigs had it in for the shelter. They said it attracted the homeless to the city and bums were bad for business. Angel thought that was a terrible way to think about human beings in need. Somebody had to stand up for poor Jerry out there circling the elm tree. She wished she could have spoken with him just a minute longer in that moment when he'd stepped free of his mind's haunted forest. She scooped the paperwork from the big desk into an envelope and turned to climb the stairs. She didn't have time for disappointment. She would throw the man the permits, run outside before Russell with his good intentions and Gene with his bad ones, broke the shower stall down. If the city council thought they were going to discourage her by relentlessly searching for code violations, then that was funny. Fighting for the shelter made her happy. It was the only thing that did anymore. She paused on the stairwell. Shelter noise thumped overhead. Dinner time. Footsteps fell as heavy as a succession of tired soldiers. A plate shattered. Russell must have ordered people inside to help set the table for supper. Good for him. The thought of the city man stampeded by 27 grumpy homeless guys made her smile. Then the world ended. The deep rumble of sound followed by shaking. The light bulb popped in a shower of filament and glass. Shoved by invisible hands, Angel fell to her knees. The floor rocked on a furious sea. She groped for the desk and crawled beneath it. Her forehead rammed the wood as it jumped around her shoulders. Choking dust exploded in her nose. She cupped her face and breathed into her hands. There was no room to run. There was rumbling and crashing on top of another rumble, and another wave slammed the massive oak desk against her head. The greater sound thundered underneath the crashing, a tsunami of freight train driven by angry gods. The shaking stopped, but it didn't stop. The concrete floor writhed as if infested with worms. There were no borders in the pitch blackness. She did not begin, and she did not end. She was the desk, she was the bricks, and she was the ceiling coming down. The desk cracked in a muffled sound. Then silence. Angel could not move. The space under the desk now contained her body in a pile of hard things, splintery things. Grit covered her fingertips, lips, and teeth. A scream erupted in her throat, but she swallowed it down and thought there was not enough air for that. She was no queen or angel. She was a shut mouth. She was a closed eye. She was a crumpled page in a book of tales the earth did not want told. Reese. Reese hated the barbecues at George and Linda's house. It was all IBM talk and the drunken do-do-si-dos and doorways with everybody flirting with everybody else's spouses. She kept poolside and focused her attention on her daughter. Madison sang to herself while she kicked in the water. She clung to the side of the kidney-shaped pool up to her armpits in a pink floating ring. Reese wished she'd brought her own bathing suit. It was the kind of hot and dirty late autumn day that made her thirst for rain. Rod stood on the deck holding a drink. He watched Madison with more attention than usual. He was posing for their hosts because in the fatherhood aspect, Rod was the clear winner. Maybe their wives were neck and neck in the beauty department, but George didn't have a kid. Resentment bubbled in Reese like prehistoric tar. Her husband's eyes were red-rimmed already, and it was barely 5 o'clock. He drank every night until the alcohol puffed up his feathers for display. She couldn't control him. She could barely look at him. His drinking was a hungry monster that was going to ruin everything. Real damage was on its way. Her own prehistory had taught her how to recognize impending disaster, but now, well, not how to stop it. In Reese's past, there was another daughter, one named Crystal, and she had lost her. If she thought on Crystal at all, it was to tell herself that she had never existed. Her ghost daughter had almost no substance anymore. The memory of that child was the color of glass. Her daughter, Madison, was a brand new story. When it came to this daughter, Reese's heart was full of rising heat. Her ardor was terrifying, but also gave her a tiny private hope that maybe she was a true person underneath the lacquer and layers and broken pieces. In the process of losing Crystal, Reese had also lost herself. In the 18 years since she'd last seen her first child, Reese had become an exoskeleton of a woman. She was brittle and hollow in all matters except with Madison. There was such a thing as being born twice. It was her second daughter who gave her life, not the other way around. Madison stopped kicking and leaned back so her hair floated like seaweed. Reese imagined her in 10 years at 15, and then another 10 years as a full-grown woman. The girl had the looks of beauty, a beauty pageant winner, but her chin was a little pointy and little bow lips. She would be safer out of the woods of childhood. It would be better when her dimpled cheeks flattened into hard planes and her hands didn't look so much like a baby's. It was too much to be that small. Anything could happen to a person that small. "Put your face in the water, Maddie," Rod said. His self-conscious smile made Reese chew poison between her back teeth. "She's okay doing what she's doing," Reese said. Rod squinted under a visor he had made with his hand. Without sunglasses, his face looked as raw as a hammered thumb. Reese sipped Diet Coke and silently listed plausible excuses for leaving early. Stomach pain, school night. Then the air itself shimmered. In the distance rolled the noise of approaching thunder, or maybe rains, maybe trains. The ground jerked with the motion of a pulled rug. Reese braced herself as gravity itself jumped up and down. Quick peaked waves swung back and forth over the edges of the pool. The hot air expanded and contracted, and for the space of 15 long seconds, the whole world shifted under a hot and turbulent sea. Rod and George staggered around, holding their drinks aloft. Linda shrieked while the backyard bucked and rolled. Flung to the deep end, Madison clutched the floating ring around her chest with tiny fists. She bobbed on the surface of the stormy waters, her lips pursed in a pink knot. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. The water chopped as though it were filled with 10 kids. With limbs of stone, Reese watched her daughter cling to that float, her legs pedaling under her body. She made it to the end and clutched at the stair rail. Still, she didn't cry. The shaking stopped. Madison dropped the floating ring and ran into Reese's arms. Reese grabbed her as though she were the one person who had been awash in a chlorinated sea. Rod and George babbled over each other. The thing to do was to see if the electricity worked. Turn on the television for the news. This was the big one for sure. They ran into the house. Linda, her robe flying open to expose soft white flesh spilling over the top of her bikini, approached with a towel for medicine. "Are you all right, honey?" Linda asked. Madison dug her face into her mother's shirt. "Let's go see what's on the news. That was the big one, right?" Her hips wiggled when she walked away in her high heel sandals. "You're prettier than her, Mommy," Madison said, like someone splashing water on a grass fire. "A lot prettier." "Thank you." Reese pulled her daughter closer. She flashed on a momentary thought that it would be possible to engulf Madison into the emptiness of her body and hold her there for safety. That was scary. What happened to the pool? Earthquake. Had to be. Car alarms hooted down the street. They kept their arms around each other as they stared into the pool. Reese conjured the old trick of concentrating on her breath to quiet her strange mind. The earthquake unsettled her. A crack split across the white expanse of the underwater bowl of the pool. They watched mud ooze from the fissure and bloom in a mushroom cloud while people turned off their cars, one by one, until it was quiet. Reese handed Madison her hat. The little girl's angel face was stoic in the shade of the brim. The ground shivered again as though it had made itself nervous with such a big display. A string of car alarms exploded in renewed ringing. Reese tossed Madison in the bag with her clothes in it. They had come from home in a separate car. Reese's shirt was wet and see-through from Madison's wet body, and besides, she needed to get home to make sure everything was all right there. An earthquake would not have come at a better time. It was the perfect excuse for leaving. "I'm still drippy," Madison said. "Dry off all the way," Reese said. "I'll take you to get frozen yogurt." Inside the house, the TV roared. Linda held the remote, her eye makeup a smudge of oily ash from the heat and the drinking. She was crying. "Are you hearing this?" she said. Newscasters spoke in excited voices. "Shake, rattle, and roll, folks. 70,000 people were stuck at Candlestick Park for the World Series. No game tonight and good luck getting home. Untold numbers dead in San Francisco. Preliminary reports rolled in. A hunk of the Bay Bridge's top level broke like a ramp to the bottom. People were jumping off and swimming in the drink." Reporters spit and buzzed the bad news from helicopters. "I'm getting dressed now," Madison said. She padded through the room. "Don't leave without me." She went into the guest bedroom, down the hall. "You're leaving?" Rod asked. "You can't leave. They invited us." "School night, Rod," she said. "Wet shirt, earthquake, stomachache. You can stay, though." On screen, a helicopter flew over the Cypress Highway in Oakland. Black smoke poured from between two levels of road, sandwiched together in wide steps of collapsed asphalt. Cars full of people were wedged between the slabs. Nobody knew how many dead. Maybe thousands. The air conditioner kicked on. Reese shivered. She called for Madison to hurry up. In the bathroom, she wiped at her shirt with a hand towel. Someone rapped on the door. She opened it, expecting to find Rod, pleading with her to stay. "Hey, you okay?" "George." He stank of charcoal and beer. His head popped in before the rest followed, the spare tire taking up a lot of space. "Yeah," she said. George shut the door with his foot. He smiled into the mirror, lowered his hands to her shoulders. He snuffled at the side of her neck. She jerked away. "What are you doing?" "You're beautiful, Reese." His breath was steamy in her throat. "I mean, seriously." "What about Linda?" As if Linda were the reason why not. "Come on, George, stop fooling around." She tried for the regular light banter, hating the sound of her own weakness. "What do you think they're doing out there right now?" George asked. His stomach pressed against her back. Panic filled her mouth with the taste of metal. He laughed. "Please," she said. He took it the wrong way, as an invitation, despite her pained face. She caught the reflection as he slid his meaty hands down her arms and gripped her wrists like bike handles. He pulled her hands out from under her. She bent forward under his weight, pain shooting through her hip bones where his weight shoved them against the marble countertop edge. "What is it with your fucked up hands, anyway?" he asked, distracted. He pressed her palms against the mirror, her fingers splayed like the legs of white spiders. "Spread your fingers." Ray's voice had been velvet. His lips curled. He knew what he was saying. Spread them. Just as suddenly she was pinned like an insect under the casual violence of another man. She had mistaken George for a soft man, for a dumb one. He grinned at her from behind, his brow a furrowed mask of corruption. She had thought there was power in her disdain, but as always it was only about who was bigger. Reese sucked in her stomach to gain the few inches of space she needed to escape. She squeezed out from beneath the hard flesh of the man's belly and moved fast down the hallway. George followed. "That fucking pool is going to cost us a fortune to fix, I'll tell you," he said, his voice full of throaty cheer. "Want cheese on your hamburgers, anybody?" Reese huddled against the wall as he passed her. She stood in the opening of the living room and felt like throwing up. Rod called for cheese and raised his glass. Earthquake or no, they had to eat, right? Linda kept her face to the TV but still managed to wave for cheese. Reese was caught in someone else's banal nightmare. Her hips hurt, and she knew she would have bruises where the skin stretched tight over bone. She wrung her hands, sickened by the popping of their freakish knuckles. Then, while she watched, Rod rested his hand on the small of Linda's back and stroked her there. In the space of a breath, he dropped it and stumbled through the open sliding glass door. Linda looked over her shoulder at Reese, raised an eyebrow, and smiled. The tectonic plates that covered the surface of things shifted. The layers that took eons for her to build split and broke apart in moments. The primordial mud had been rippling beneath all the time, waiting for a breach. Reese's heart galloped in fury, and she raced to meet it. Rage filled her with a hot comfort that washed away the weakness she felt pinned by George's insistent body in the bathroom. Her facade of normalcy tore away in cheeks that she couldn't stop. She wasn't one of the group. She wasn't one of any group. There was nothing normal about her. She wasn't anything. There was nothing normal about her. She forgot to concentrate on her breathing. She balled her crooked fingers into fists. The screen flashed with the World Series commercial loop. Women in bikinis washed cars, and mobs of happy men drank beers. George and Rod, outside at the barbecue, clinked their glasses together and acted like television commercial friends. There had to be a hammer in the garage. Everyone had a hammer. The television and framed nickel prints and glass-topped coffee table cried out for smashing. She could break Linda's fingers one by one. She knew how that was done. She knew how to wipe the smugness from Linda's face and turn it into something else altogether. The news started again with footage of an apartment building in San Francisco that had leapt off its foundation. Sewage burst through the cracks of sidewalks in brown geysers. Smoke billowed from the rooftops. A reporter on the street asked questions of the passers-by. "I was driving when it happened," someone said. "I was driving and I didn't feel a thing." She went into the kitchen and put a glass under the faucet, but the pipes groaned and the water came out dusky and full of particles. Something caught her eye on the counter. A candle flickered next to the toaster. It was a Mexican Virgin Mary devotional filled with red wax. The Mary figure draped in a nun's blue habit and standing on a bower of roses. Reese put down the glass of cloudy water and stared at the candle. Mary of the candle lifted her eyes to Reese. "We share a secret," Mary said. "I know what you are." Reese grabbed the candle. The hot glass seared her palm. Cursing, she flung it into the sink where it shattered into pieces. She picked up a shard of the waxy glass between two of her fingers that were bent as twigs. Our Lady of Broken Things. She thought she'd had everything under control. Meanwhile, the rest of them mocked her. She never had anything under control. From a snarl-forgotten place in her mind, a thought whispered that she could take Madison with her. She headed south on the 101. She would take them to where the road wound by the coast and veer right until they tumbled into the sea. Then it was more than a thought. She felt the accelerator under the ball of her foot and the stomach-dropping fall into the rocks. The whisper became a shout. Her palms burned with the comfort of the steering wheel as she wrenched it with neck-snapping certainty toward death. "Go home to Daddy," she yelled. Terrified, she threw the piece of broken glass like shaved obsidian onto the floor. Maybe Linda would step on it. Reese hoped so, but it wouldn't be her fault. She was in a window of time that she felt closing on her like a guillotine's blade. If she slipped away now, she could escape with doing minimal harm. If she left in that second, nothing would be her fault. "Mommy, wait!" Madison was frantic behind the door. Reese grabbed her handbag. Her pulse slammed against her eardrums. Rage flared, hot as white flame. Did not care who got burned or smashed or lost. She had to get away from Madison. Madison wasn't safe with her. This was as certain as plate tectonics. Reese talked herself down as her sandals flapped against the stones of the walk leading away from the house. Let Rod take care of her. He wouldn't be able to stay late groping Linda when he thought nobody was watching. It was a school night. He'd have to sober up quick to get Madison home by bedtime. An aftershock rocked her car from side to side. She gunned the engine to the fresh cacophony of haywire alarms. She burned past the rows of oversized, creamy stucco houses lining the street like molars on an open jaw. None of these buildings had toppled in the quake, and that was too bad. The steering wheel thumped free from under Reese's misshapen fingers as she turned onto the freeway. She drove straight on. She passed the exit to the 101 connector. At least she would avoid the temptation of the winding coastal road. The road stretched in a long ribbon of unmarked asphalt. No cracks broke this highway, but a fault line ran under it nonetheless. All of the smooth surfaces of Reese's life held a secret weakness that could split open at any time, let out all the filth. Reese twisted the radio dial. No channels played music, only earthquake news. She turned it up to match the noise in her head. In her early 20s, she'd had an older lady therapist named Eleanor who didn't buy Reese's assertions that she was fine. "You're not fine," Eleanor said. "You're a nuclear warhead about to go off at any minute."